To begin with, my sister-in-law Laura was a really nice and generous lady. She always greeted me with love and made me feel like I was a sister from the first time I met her. We had grown really close over the years since we were both working women, and we spent our weekends shopping or going to lunch. Laura was always a fit person who took excellent care of her health, so the terrible news of her breast cancer diagnosis shocked all of us. We united behind her and supported her fight against cancer. I made it a point to visit her frequently during her chemotherapy rounds, to spend time with her and watch over my infant niece whenever possible. During one of my visits to her home, while we sat together in her living room, she told me some news that broke my heart. Her voice trembled as she stated that her physicians had delivered a devastating diagnosis. Her cancer was severe and resistant to therapy. They'd given her a prognosis that left little room for optimism. The weight of her words weighed heavily in the air, and I fought to find the appropriate words to console her. In that sensitive moment, I asked her what I could do to make life easier for her. Her eyes, which were typically filled with love and joy, suddenly showed a mixture of fear and resignation. She expressed gratitude for everything I had done for her and wished she didn't have to burden me with a secret she had kept concealed from everyone. I strongly stated that she had nothing to apologize for and that I would do anything, no questions asked. She then entrusted me with a secret she had never told anyone, including her own parents. She told me that years ago, during her undergraduate days, she experienced a horrible event that has tormented her ever since. She was the victim of a sexual attack at a party where she had been drinking too much. The attacker wore a mask, making it impossible for her to recognize him. The horror of that night had left profound scars that she had been carrying silently for years. As she described the events of that fatal evening, I listened in terror. She was in a relationship with my brother at the time, so she naturally turned to him for comfort and support, hoping that he was the only person in the world who understood her. Instead of finding relief in his embrace, she was confronted with astonishment and accusations. My brother couldn't believe that another man could violate her in such a way, and in his disbelief, he began questioning her behavior. He suggested that her attire or demeanor toward the person at the party had contributed to the assault on her. He couldn't believe a man would do anything like this to a lady without her giving him some sort of signal. Laura was heartbroken that he was questioning her in this manner. The weight of shame and guilt wrongly placed on her shoulders by someone she loved exacerbated her pain. Despite this, she summoned the bravery to denounce the assault to the police and even underwent a medical examination, which confirmed her claim about the assault. Laura wanted the culprit to be punished, but she lived in a college community where parties were popular and thousands of students interacted at night. Despite their best efforts, the authorities were unable to identify the masked assailant. It didn't help that no one at the party stepped forward to testify for her. As a result, the inquiry stalled, and Laura never received justice. Her parents were still living at the time, so they were the only ones who believed in her, which helped her overcome the terrible guilt of what had occurred to her. According to Laura, after months of discussing the situation with my brother, he eventually came around and apologized to her for his initial reaction. He stated that he should have known better than to trust her, and pledged to be more supportive of her in the future. Despite the tension in the relationship, Laura did not want to break it with him, so she decided to forgive him. Despite my brother's best efforts to be there for her in the years that followed, the tragedy never left her mind. I was devastated to hear this, because my brother had never disclosed any of it to me. Laura explained to me that my brother disliked discussing this, and that he had instructed Laura to keep this occurrence a secret, as if it were unclean for others to find out. I gently massaged Laura's hands and assured her that I didn't blame her for anything that had happened to her, because it was never her fault. Laura grinned wryly and told me she had more to say. She talked slowly, as if each word was both a confession and a request for understanding. She then disclosed that she had been sexually attacked again after the initial event, this time by her former employer from her prior position. I remembered how, 4 or 5 years ago, she abruptly left her job, despite the fact that she had always enjoyed working there. Laura hadn't told me why until then. Her hands trembled as she described how terrified and helpless she felt during the second assault. She informed me she was numb with horror throughout the incident and could only move after the assault was over. Tears flowed down her cheeks as she departed the scene in a daze, her entire body trembling with the weight of what had just occurred. She recounted feeling distant from everything, as if she were witnessing the whole incident from outside her own body. Later, as she sat in her car crying, her thoughts drifted to my brother, and she knew from his previous reaction that he would blame her again. This time she told me how she felt ashamed when she discovered she had let another man assault her without her consent. She felt unclean and disgusted with herself. This time, the trauma had a negative impact on her mental health because, unlike the last time, she no longer had someone to confide in. Her parents had died, and she was afraid to open out to my brother. As a result, she fell into melancholy and experienced a few panic attacks. Laura told me she debated whether to report the assault to the police and have her boss arrested or to safeguard her marriage. 2 months later, she realized that she was pregnant. She understood right away that the child wasn't my brother. This discovery made her even more depressed. She was unsure how to convey the news to my brother because she assumed he would ask for a divorce. As a result of her deteriorating mental state, Laura decided to end her life. She told me how she felt helpless at the time, since she lacked the strength to end the pregnancy and didn't want anyone to know about her assaults. I listened to her story holding back tears, unable to understand what she had been through silently without any of us knowing. Laura went on to tell me how, the evening she had decided to end her life with sleeping pills, everything changed when my brother unexpectedly discovered the positive pregnancy tests in the bathroom. Instead of waiting for an explanation, he began bouncing up and down, overjoyed that she was pregnant and that they could finally start a family together. Caught up in his joy and engulfed in his embrace, she found herself unable to bring him down with the truth. She subsequently told me how ashamed she felt for not having the fortitude to tell him the truth that day, or over the previous 2 years, that the child was never his. Laura informed me that every time she saw the touching moments between her daughter and my brother, her heart broke again. Tears flowed down her cheeks as she apologized to me for lying to my brother and everyone else, calling herself a coward and a loser who did not deserve such a lovely family as ours. She believed that cancer was God's punishment for her falsehoods. She promised me she would finally confess everything to my brother before she died. However, she asked me to make her a pledge. It turns out she wanted me to look after her daughter while she was gone. She grasped my hands and implored me that because she had no family members left, as both parents and grandparents had passed away, I was her only option for maybe caring for her kid if my brother refused to adopt the child after learning the whole truth. I was shaken after hearing everything and needed some time to comprehend it. As a woman myself, I felt profound sympathy for what she had gone through. I knew she was telling me the whole truth because she was dying and needed to get it off her chest. Of course, I recognized that she had lied to my brother about being the baby's father all along, but she was also clearly sorry, and at this point, all I could do was convince her that, if necessary, I would raise my niece myself. She exhaled a sigh of relief as I fulfilled my promise to her. Laura's illness advanced over weeks, and I continued to visit her, clinging on to her hope of survival, even as the reality of her condition became clear. She remained as courageous as possible throughout. Finally, she went away peacefully in her sleep. Her absence has created a void, yet her spirit continues to encourage me to live my life with kindness and gratitude. She has taught me that even in the worst times, there can be moments of grace and beauty if we have the strength to perceive them. She was more than just my sister-in-law. She was a great friend and confidant. After Laura died, my brother shared with me the contents of a letter she left behind, which revealed the sad facts she had previously confided in me. It was a devastating realization for him to realize that the child he had hugged with such delight was not his own child. His anguish and rage were obvious as he dealt with this new reality, which was exacerbated by the recent death of his wife. In his grief, he couldn't bring himself to keep the baby any longer, so he informed our parents and me that he was giving her up. I informed him strongly that Laura had asked me to watch after my niece, and I wanted to take care of her even if he no longer wanted her. And this is how I welcomed my niece into my home without hesitation. I was really heartbroken for her because she had just lost her mother, and with no other family left, her parents and grandparents had passed away. I knew she needed a stable and supportive atmosphere at the moment. Later, when we gathered for the reading of Laura's will, everyone was already emotional because they knew my niece did not belong to my brother. Many of my family members were divided over this news. However, Laura was no longer with us to face their fury. According to her will, she had made specific and intentional plans for her daughter's future, leaving every asset and resource she had accumulated over the years for her daughter's benefit. Laura had a large sum of money to contribute because she had inherited it from both her parents and her grandparents. To my brother's dismay, there was nothing designated for him, a decision that further exacerbated his pain and sense of betrayal, and he angrily stated that it was terrible of her not to leave him anything in her will. Laura had specifically stated that she had committed the management of these funds to me, provided I was willing to take on the responsibility of caring for her kid. This news surprised both me and everyone else present. I believe this is why Laura wanted me to make that pledge to her weeks before she died, so she could modify her will. She was correct to believe her intuition and not give my brother access to her funds, since if that had been the case, he would never have given my niece anything and would have abandoned her without money. Because my brother refused to continue caring for the child, I was eventually granted full custody of my niece, and because of the financial support I received, I have been able to care for her all these years. My brother did try to battle me over the money Laura had left behind, because he believed he was entitled to at least half of it. However, the judge did not listen to him. In rage, my brother told me that he didn't want anything to do with Laura's daughter, and that he never wanted to see my face again, because I had clearly betrayed him by taking in the girl. I firmly told him that I was sorry for all of his sorrow, but I was not going to break my commitment to Laura. Laura's decision to keep the facts from my brother was wrong, and I realized it. However, now that she is no longer with us, I am convinced that the child is not to blame for her parents' conduct. This is why I've always focused only on establishing a caring and secure home for my niece, sheltering her from the intricacies of the past. Using the money Laura left behind, I've ensured that my niece has had all she wants over the years. I also used cash to buy her a property, which my niece will entirely inherit when she reaches the age of majority. I've made every effort to send her to great schools and to care for her as if she were my own daughter. I am not married and have dedicated my entire life to raising my niece. Despite my best attempts, my niece occasionally asks legitimate questions about her parents, particularly her father. She misses my brother, but she recognizes that under these conditions, relationships cannot be forced. My decision to prioritize my niece's health has affected my relationship with the rest of my family. They've all chosen to cut ties with me and no longer invite me to any events because they believe my actions are foolish and that I've prioritized my niece before my family. Even my own parents believe I should have given up my niece, and they have often expressed their disappointment that I am raising someone else's child who has done nothing except lie to my brother. As you might expect, the past several years have been a challenging journey in which I've had to negotiate the chasm between what I believe is right and the ramifications of those decisions on my family connections. This year, as my niece approaches her 21st birthday, I feel a sense of accomplishment in preparing to transfer all of her assets, including the home I've acquired for her, in accordance with Laura's desires. It's a milestone I've been working toward for a long time, and I believe I've done everything I could to safeguard her up to this point, and she's now ready to make her own decisions. My brother contacted me unexpectedly last month, saying he needed to chat with me about something very urgent. My heart skipped a beat, and I wondered whether he had recognized the mistake in his ways and wished to reconnect with me and my niece after all these years. I agreed to meet with him, but I didn't want my niece to find out and give her false hope before I found out the real motive for his visit. As a result, I scheduled our meeting to coincide with her workday. When my brother came, there was a sense of suspense mixed with genuine affection as we had a small conversation. My brother told me he had since remarried, and I was pleasantly surprised to learn that he now has 2 children of his own. He showed me images of them, and his boys looked exactly like him. I was disappointed that he hadn't even invited me to his wedding, but I also understood that he did what he had to do when Laura betrayed him. During our talk, I couldn't help but feel proud as I highlighted my niece's accomplishments and improvements over the years. I informed my brother that she would occasionally ask about him and was pretty mature for her age, expecting that he would tell me that he wanted to meet with her. Despite my willingness to communicate these encouraging tidings, he seemed uninterested in my niece. He interrupted me, his tone immediately altering to one of seriousness, and informed me that the reason he stood in front of me was not to discuss my niece, but to request ownership of my niece's home. I stared at him wide-eyed as he explained how he and his family had suddenly lost their home, and our parents had already loaned them a large sum of money over the years, so he could no longer turn to them for assistance. Since he knew I had bought this property with Laura's money, he believed it was only fair for me and my niece to let him have it to accommodate his large family while we moved to a much smaller place. I asked him what made him believe he was capable of asking such a question. My brother went on to explain how he had previously done a lot for Laura, but she had turned out to be nothing more than a leech. Now, I knew this wasn't true because Laura always worked and paid for her own portion of the house while she lived with my brother. Even during her chemotherapy treatment, she paid for her own bills and had health insurance. I brought this out to my brother, telling him that it was unreasonable for him to demand a house from all of this when he didn't even bother parenting my niece after Laura died. However, this simply irritated him, and he told me that as his sister, I should quit carrying a torch for a long-deceased woman and instead assist him and his family in securing this house before my niece turned 21. He urged me to consider things from his point of view for once, and to remember that this location was his legitimate property. The weight of his words hung in the air as I considered his request. I couldn't help but consider the ramifications of such a decision. The property was more than simply a physical asset. It symbolized security and stability, which had been meticulously planned for my niece's future. To give it up no matter how badly my brother needed it, would mean breaking commitments and risking the stability I had fought so hard to establish. My niece's well-being and future were paramount, and any decision involving her assets had to be made with her best interests in mind, no matter how difficult or emotional the situation. In that moment, I grasped the gravity of the situation and the need to stick to my beliefs. I firmly told him that I couldn't back his request, since he needed to take responsibility for his own family rather than relying on his late wife's possessions. I continued to tell him how disgusted I was that he had ever considered this possibility, and how he had given up all rights when he handed over custody of the daughter to me following Laura's death. My brother's face flushed red with rage at my statement, but I continued before he could interject again. I voiced my disappointment that he had not been present for my niece during all of these years. I didn't hesitate to remind him that, while I understood Laura's betrayal, he should equally appreciate that she had been the victim of multiple traumas. It was unjust for him to shift the burden to her now, especially because he had not reported her after her first sexual attack. When I told him this, his eyes widened with amazement, and he wanted to know how I knew, given that no one else knew the truth. This is when I told him about Laura. This is when I told him Laura had confided in me and entrusted me with the task of caring for my niece before she died. When my brother heard this, he became accusatory, alleging I had caught him off guard and describing me as a liar like Laura. I shook my head and reminded him that Laura was terminally sick and had already suffered enough. After all these years of him not taking responsibility for my niece, while I had done everything I could to assist her, he had no right to bring up the past and complain about it now, just because he wanted Laura's money. I was weary of him constantly behaving like a victim. It was disheartening to see him shift blame and claim entitlement when he had not been financially supportive of my niece for years. His audacity to come after 21 years and demand ownership of her property felt like a smack in the face, ignoring all the sacrifices and efforts I had made to assure my niece's well-being and future security. My brother was outraged that I would not give in to his demands. Since our meeting, my dad and my parents have called me constantly, demanding that I stop being difficult for no reason and that I show familial devotion to them rather than my niece. It's so strange and terrifying that, when it comes to money, even blood relatives may transform into beasts. Am I an asshole for standing up for my niece and refusing to cave in to my brother's absurd demands? Update 1. First and foremost, I'm blown away by how lovely everyone has been in my DMs and comments. Thank you for making me grin. Second, I can't tell you how many women have contacted me, telling me how they have gone through similar experiences and how sorry they are for Laura. I wish I could give every one of you a big hug and relieve your misery. Sexual assault is the worst thing that can happen to a woman, and I wish Laura could have received assistance at the time. She was not a nasty person, and she did not deserve what she went through. It's unfortunate that I have to defend her, but just because you've never been sexually attacked does not indicate that others haven't. My sister-in-law fought back during the initial assault, demonstrating amazing bravery despite the stress. However, the second occurrence left her more shaken, and she was understandably stuck in dread, as is the case for the majority of victims of sexual assault. I wish she had felt comfortable enough to open up to me sooner, because I would have been there for her in every way. Knowing what she went through crushes my heart, and I wish I could have been there for her during those difficult days. Now, to those of you who are labelling Laura a cheater and refusing to believe her tale, I wish to God that you never have to go through such a horrible experience just to have people question you. If Laura had really had an affair, she may have instructed me to contact the man for custody after she died. Furthermore, if there had been an affair, the male would most likely not have remained silent for so long. He would have undoubtedly turned up for his daughter, especially given how much money Laura had left behind for her. Also, if she had an affair, I am confident she would have wanted her daughter to know her biological father and would have told me. Laura did everything she could to keep her daughter safe until she died. Update 2. I sat down with my niece and told her that my brother had lately been to speak with me, and his main goal was to gain control of the house. I advised her to be cautious if he ever approached her. As I talked, I could see the rage and pain in her eyes. She had hoped for years that her father would reach out to her because he truly cared. However, when she discovered that his contact was motivated by his own wants, she felt deceived. I can't believe him, she informed me, her voice shaking from emotion. After all this time, he only reached out when he needed something. She told me that she had no desire to associate with him. She told me how grateful she was that her mother had not left him anything. She then hugged me and expressed her gratitude for everything I'd done for her over the years. Her statements were simultaneously painful and empowering to hear. It brought tears to my eyes as I understood that, despite the sorrow of her father's acts, she was strong and determined to carry on without him. Update 3. 3. After speaking with my niece, I decided to send a lengthy email to my parents and brother to document everything and state my position clearly. In the email, I described our previous interactions and highlighted that they had no right to ask me to hand over my niece's home to my brother. I stressed that this request constituted financial fraud and stated unequivocally that I would take legal action if my brother attempted to see me or my niece again to request the house for his family. I informed my brother that by choosing not to care for his kid, he surrendered all rights. I also discussed the numerous difficulties and challenges I had while raising my niece on my own with no prior experience. I highlighted the emotional, financial, and logistical hurdles I faced in providing Hannah with a stable, caring home. I also informed him that he had never paid child support or checked in on his daughter in all these years. I pointed out that he and my parents should feel nothing but guilt for attempting to take something that did not belong to them. I insisted that they had no right to suddenly intervene and make demands after all this time, especially because they had contributed nothing to her upbringing or well-being. The email was detailed and sincere, reflecting the sacrifices I had made for my niece. I reaffirmed my commitment to protecting her and honouring Laura's desires, no matter what. My message was clear and unequivocal. They had forfeited their right to be a part of her life due to their neglect and lack of support, and they had no place in her future today. I never received a response after writing that email, but my brother and parents have not contacted me since, which is sufficient for me. The silence speaks volumes, and I'm relieved to have some serenity and the assurance that they will not meddle with my niece's life any longer. My niece is preparing for her promotion and impending birthday celebration. Watching her manage these thrilling occasions makes me very proud. I'm so proud of the lady she's grown into, and I can't wait to support her at every big life milestone. It already makes me emotional to think about how much she has grown and how much she resembles Laura now, particularly her lips and brow. Every day, I see my niece embodying Laura's strength and tenacity. I only hope she can be as brave as her mother, whatever she does.